or any severe acute or chronic medical conditions were excluded. Pregnant and lactating females were also excluded in the criteria. A total of 131 eligible patients were included in this criteria, and both the tools, that is mini questionnaire and WHO Brev questionnaire, was applied. Now, in my result, out of the 131 patients, 74 patients had a prevalence of psychiatric comorbidity, among which the most prevalent ones were GAD, that is generalized anxiety disorder, and major depressive disorder, followed by some comorbid conditions, that is a major depressive episode with anxiety disorder, that is generalized anxiety or panic. Among the socio-demographic profiling, the socioeconomic status was significant associated, where highly prevalent, the psychiatric comorbidity was prevalent in lower and upper lower classes, the percentage being 29.7 to 52.7%. In the clinical factors, the duration of illness affected the most. The patients who had psychiatric comorbidity was found to be minimal duration of illness to be 9 months and above, whereas without psychiatric comorbidity had 7 months or above. Amongst the disease staging, the higher the staging was, that is the stage 4 cancer had highest prevalence of psychiatric comorbidity. Along with this, the combined treatment, that is not just the surgery, radiotherapy or chemotherapy, but rather a combined treatment, patient who had been going under combined treatment were more prevalent towards psychiatric comorbidities. Hospitalization also affected, that is more patients who had more than 2 hospitalization were affected, and the quality of life among that, all the 4 domains, that is physical, psychological, environmental and social, were affected in patients who had psychiatric comorbidity with breast cancer rather than just breast cancer patients. To conclude with this discussion, high psychiatric burden, over 56% of the breast cancer patients had psychiatric comorbidity, mainly generalized anxiety and depression. Socioeconomic vulnerability, psychiatric comorbidity was significantly higher among patients from lower socioeconomic strata. Longer illness duration, advanced cancer staging, multimodal treatment, and repeated hospitalization affected the contributed to higher psychological distress. Patients with psychiatric comorbidity showed significantly poorer quality of life across all WHO domains, and findings support the need for routine mental health screening, early counseling, and integrated psycho-oncological services for comprehensive breast cancer should be present. To conclude, more than half of the breast cancer patients experience psychiatric comorbidities that substantially diminish their quality of life. Early identification and timely intervention can improve emotional resilience, treatment adherence, and clinical outcome. Holistic care model should be included in mental health screening as a routine component to ensure comprehensive patient well-being. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Very excellent presentation. We request if audience wants to ask any question to you. Okay, then I shall ask you one question. What is the implication of your study? What can you think in future?
My aim of the study was to estimate that what is the prevalence. Like, not just patient with breast cancer can go through a lot of psychological distress which can lead to psychiatric comorbidity. So my aim was to create an awareness that we do have psychiatric comorbidities along with in the patients of breast cancer, because of which there should be a multimodal treatment, like a holistic approach towards the treatment of breast cancer. Mental health screening should be there in the patients so that it can be detected at an early stage and can be treated along with the breast cancer treatment.
Very nice. What do you think of your study is some unique strength of your paper?
So probably one of the strength can be that, we as a institution, we had a separate institute of cancer patients only, where we could find like people coming from very remote areas, and I could get the sample size very not very a short sample size, rather than a very I had a very different patients were coming from different socioeconomic stratas. because we had a separate institute of cancer institute in our Rohilkhand Medical College.
Very nice. And one last point is what you think is a limitations of your study, what you could not do, but other future research or people who want to conduct study in this area, they can try to overcome that limitation.
So one of the limitations was that it's a cross-sectional study. I was taking a patient at a particular snap of time. We were not assessing patients who were coming after recurrence that is very common in cancer patients. So those patients we couldn't analyze because of that cross-sectional study. If it would have been a cohort study, then we would have gotten a comprehensive result also.
Okay, very nice. Does audience want to ask any question, any comment? Okay, thank you very much. A very excellent presentation. Do we have the next free paper presenter with us? How many free of nicotine dependence in patients with schizophrenia? So over to you, Dr. Rohan. Please begin.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Rohan Bhargav from Mahatma Gandhi Medical College. A comparative study to assess the clinical association of nicotine dependence in patients with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a chronic and disabling psychiatric disorder affecting about 1% of the global population. Patients often have a significantly reduced life expectancy, largely due to a circulatory and respiratory disease. Chronic cigarette smoking is one of the leading contributors to this increased mortality. Research consistently shows that individuals with psychiatric illness, especially schizophrenia, have significantly higher smoking rates, nearly 5 times higher than the general population. Several hypotheses, including the self medication theory, suggest that nicotine temporarily improves attention, motivation, and working memory by enhancing dopaminergic pathways. Chronic smoking also leads to the upregulation of nicotine receptors, which may help reduce negative symptoms such as social withdrawal and blunted affect. The aim of this study was to assess the clinical association between nicotine dependence and the severity of schizophrenia symptoms. The objectives included comparing the positive and negative symptoms among the nicotine dependent versus the non dependent patients, exploring the relationships between illness duration and nicotine dependence, and evaluating the overall prevalence of dependence in schizophrenia. This was a hospital-based cross-sectional comparative study conducted at Mahatma Gandhi Medical College and Hospital, Jaipur, over 18 months with a sample size of 66 patients divided equally based on their Phagostome test scores. The results showed no significant differences in socio-demographic or baseline clinical variables. However, among nicotine users, most had moderate to high dependence. In conclusion, nicotine dependence was associated with significantly higher PANSS scores indicating greater symptom severity. These findings highlight the importance of routine screening and incorporating the structured tobacco cessation interventions into the comprehensive management of schizophrenia. Thank you.
Very nice presentation, very brief presentation, and uh, any question from the audience? Anyone wants to ask any question or comment? Okay, so how did you calculate the sample size of your study? Like, how did you do the sampling methodology for your study?
Ma'am, you can use the
You can be little loud. Yes,
we have to use the formula for the case sample study,
yes.
and we have to take two paradigms. One is the one who are schizophrenic patients and are dependent, and the others who are schizophrenic patients but they are not dependent on nicotine. And using the formula with my help of the PSM department, I was able to take out the case study sample size.
Okay. Can you tell me, like, there are many studies which have done PANS and assessed nicotine in patients with schizophrenia. What your study found, new finding, and what is similar to other studies and what is different from other studies? Like one finding which you found, it's always in all studies this finding is found, and in your study also that finding was found, and one finding is totally different, or something which all studies say it is like that, but in your study you found it different. So do you have any like
The similarity is that in schizophrenia there is social withdrawal. Because of that, the patient isolates himself. So because of that, now patient wants something that is a little energetic. Like the patient might start taking more tea, like 10 to 12 teas at a time, or start using nicotine, like they will start using BD, या फिर they will start using cigarettes. And this was the most important purpose of my study.
okay, and if doctors who are practicing, they want to understand that if they see patients with schizophrenia and nicotine dependence, what your study findings can help somebody practicing in their clinic, like what they should learn from your study.
The most important thing is to take the substance history from the patient. If we ignore the substance history, then it could be bad for the prognosis of the patient. Substance history is also very important during the case history of the patient.
Okay, that is very nice. And one last question, since we have time. Uh, if somebody gives you some funding for this study, or you get some grant to conduct this study on a big level, then how your small study you can expand it at a big level? If somebody
Yes, ma'am,
says
yes, ma'am.
we have lots of billions of dollars to invest in research, so just your nicotine and schizophrenia, how you want to do some expansion of this project?
Many big institutes have tobacco cessation centers in their universities. So we can help the patients to reach those centers, and we can even apply the spirometries where we can measure the carboxyhemoglobin in their blood, and with that help we can see how much they are dependent with nicotine or tobacco.
Okay, so thank you very much. And it is a nice presentation and very brief and concise. And you answered all the questions very well. Thank you. Bye. Dr. Rishabh Pundil, he is the presenting author, and his co authors are Dr. Raman Ali from the Psychiatric Department, Rohilkhand Medical College and Hospital. He is presenting on psychiatric comorbidities and quality of life in patients of myocardial infarction. And it's a cross sectional study. Okay, please begin your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Rishabh Pundi. I am presenting a thesis topic on psychiatric comorbidities and quality of life in patients of myocardial infarction, a cross-section studies. Introduction. Coronary heart disease stands as a significant contributor to the global disease burden. The lasting impact of acute myocardial infarction encompasses both physical and emotional distress, causing detrimental effect on the daily lives of the individual post myocardial infarction. Indian exhibits a fourfold higher susceptibility to acute myocardial infarction in contrast to individuals from other nations. A predisposition attributed to a convergence of genetic and lifestyle element fostering metabolic dysfunction. The prevalence of psychiatric prevalence of myocardial infarction in India stands as a 64.3% per thousand people. Aims and objective aims to assess prevalence of psychiatric comorbidity and quality of life in patients with myocardial infarction. Objective to assess prevalence of psychiatric comorbidities in patients with myocardial infarction, to determine the quality of life in patients with myocardial infarction, and to study the association among socio-demographic factor, clinical factor, and quality of life in patients of myocardial infarction with and without psychiatric comorbidities. Methodology. I conducted a study at Rohilkhand Medical College, Bareilly. My study period was from May 24 to May 25. I got clearance from Institutional Ethical Committee. An informed consent of patient is taken. Patient of first episode of myocardial infarction who were undergoing treatment from medicine department, OPD and IPD basis. 70 myocardial infarction patients were studied according to sample size formula for cross-section study in finite population. Assessment tool used were socio-demographic profiling, clinical profile performa, mini international neuropsychiatric interview, and quality of life scale. Inclusion criteria for patients: patient with first episode of myocardial infarction after 4 to 6 weeks of index episode, age between 18 to 16 years, and patient who gave informed consent. Exclusion criteria: coexisting major or chronic physical illness other than those included in risk factor like hypertension, diabetes mellitus, smoking, dyslipidemia, family history of coronary artery disease, overweight, physical activity for MI. Individual with previous history of psychiatric disorder, patient on psychotropic medication except benzodiazepine, and patient due for angioplasty or coronary artery bypass surgery. Result: among 70 myocardial infarction patients, 57% had a psychiatric disorder, while 42.9% had no psychiatric disorder. Among psychiatric disorder, major depressive disorder was the most common diagnosis, followed by generalized anxiety disorder, with small proportions showing panic disorder, agoraphobia, substance use, or comorbid condition. Socio-demographic factor reveal significant association, lower education level, and nuclear family structure were strongly linked to psychiatric mobilities. Occupation show borderline significant, while religion and habitat were not associated. In socio-demographic factor, like in education, significance is lower education level associated with higher psychiatric mobility. In occupation, higher mobility among business person and housewives. Family type, higher mortality in nuclear families. Quality of life analysis show that patient with psychiatric disorder had a significant poor scorer across all WHO quality of life domain, including general quality of life, physical, psychological, social, and environmental. In general quality of life domain 1, lower score in psychiatric group, and in general quality of life 2, we found as lower perceived well-being. In physical health, there is a poor physical functioning. In psychological health, lower psychological well-being, and in social relationship, lower social functioning, and environmental, lower environmental satisfaction. Among clinical factors, significant association with psychotic mobilities were observed for the site of myocardial infarction, thrombolysis status, chest pain, ECG changes, severity of myocardial infarction, dyslipidemia, and overweight. In clinical profile, site of myocardial infarction significance is entry-wall MI, more common in psychiatric group, thrombolysis, higher mobility in thrombolyzed patient, higher mobility in those with chest pain, ST elevation associated with morbidities, mild and moderate case showing higher mobility of myocardial infarction, higher mobility in patient with dyslipidemia, and overweight participant showing higher mobility. Discussion: psychiatric mobility was high after first episode of myocardial infarction, mainly depression, anxiety. Finding aligned with the two studies, Patel et al. And Shruti et al. Lower education and nuclear family structure were strongly linked to higher psychiatric mobilities, reflecting the importance of health literacy, support system, and coping resource in post-myocardial infarction adjustment. Anti-myocardial infarction, ST elevation, thrombolysis, dyslipidemia, and overweight showed significant associated with psychiatric disorder. Quality of life was poor in affected patient, consistent with global study linking cardiac severity to mental health outcomes. Conclusion: psychiatric comorbidities were highly prevalent after myocardial infarction, mainly depression, anxiety. This significantly impaired all quality of life domain like physical, psychological, social, and environmental. Lower education, nuclear family structure, severe myocardial infarction feature, dyslipidemia, and overweight were key predictors. Routine mental health screening and early intervention are essential in post-myocardial infarction care, and integrated multidisciplinary cardiac psychiatric rehabilitation can improve adherence, recovery, and long-term outcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Very excellent presentation. So anyone from the audience wants to ask any question or give any comments? Anyone from the audience? Okay, then I will ask you some questions. How did you calculate the inclusion and exclusion criteria of your study?
Inclusion and exclusion criteria like
Little loud. Yeah.
inclusion and exclusion criteria.
You can go little, adjust the height of the mic. Yes. Yes.
Inclusion and exclusion criteria, sir, ma'am, I take from my parents' article, in which patient age is like from 18 to 60 years.
Yes.
Because above 60 is above 60 patient age, there is a lot of clinical factor present, like physical abnormality, medical abnormality, like myocardial infarction, tuberculosis, and or late geriatric problem is present in patient. And below 18 year of age, there is a less chances of medical illness like myocardial infarction, tuberculosis, asthma. And ma'am, I take a patient like after 4 to 6 weeks of index episode, like after 4 to 6 weeks of myocardial infarct, I take patient because after 4 to 6 weeks there is a cardiac biomarker present in patient, and in early phase there is a marker are generally normal, and after some time the marker rises in significant area.
Okay, very nice. There is something like strengths and limitations of a study. So, what are the strengths of the study?
Ma'am, strength of the study is like, ma'am, this studies is there is a limited studies in the North Indian region related to this mental health and cardiac health correlation, and I use significant specific tools like mini international tool to exclude various psychiatric disorder and quality of life domain, like, and I use I find correlation between the psychological well-being and cardiac issue among the patient.
Okay, very nice. Now, as a study is for the cardiologist also and the psychiatrist also in myocardial infarction patients, what message you want to give to cardiologist and what message you want to give to psychiatrist for practical aspects from your study?
Ma'am, for cardiologist, this is generally seen that cardiologist is seen is using our psychotropic medication without consulting any psychiatrist like benzodiazepine and an antidepressant, without find out the root cause. Yeah, without counseling, they start directly with psychotherapy. And for psychiatrist, there should be a liaison between the cardiologist and psychiatrist to ensure the better outcome for patient.
Okay, very nice, very excellent take home points. Thank you, very nice presentation. Thank you. And audience would like to ask him any question? Anyone? Okay, thank you very much. Fine. So we now proceed to the okay. We have with us Dr. P. Sneha Bala, who is the junior resident and primary presenter, and we have you have Dr. Sunil Kumar P. Suryavanshi, professor of psychiatry, as the co-author, and the study is from the Central Institute of Psychiatry, Ranchi, and a presentation is on artificial imagination, the machine's vision of mental illness. So over to you, please begin your presentation.
Good morning to one and all present here. I'm Dr. Sneha Bala, and I'm here to present my study titled Artificial Imagination, the Machine's Vision of Mental Illness, conducted under the guidance of Dr. Sunil Kumar Suryavanshi. The advent of generative AI has rapidly shaped how the public views mental illness. This has the power to create and in the dissemination and interpretation of images, including those of mental health. So what happens now with the advent of generative AI is that people tend to use these generative AI image models to generate images of mental health conditions. Considering the barriers to care and the easy accessibility of these machine models, more and more people are turning to these models, with over 34 million images being created every single day. Now, it is pertinent to discuss how the visual representation of mental illnesses by these models impact people, and hence it's pertinent to explore the use of these images and how accurate they are. Coming to methodology, the aim of the study was to explore how a publicly accessible AI image generator visually represents psychiatric disorders. The objectives were to generate images for psychiatric diagnostic terms using DAL E3 model. The second objective was to identify the visual patterns and potential biases in the outputs. Methodology consisted of a study design which was exploratory and observational analysis of AI generated images with a sample of 16 images, 4 images per prompt. The tools used were DAL E3 and the WHO fact sheet on mental disorders for the actual psychiatric diagnostic terms which were used as prompts. So the procedure consisted of the text prompts corresponding to the WHO fact sheet being entered into the DAL E3 without style and size modification, and 4 images were generated per prompt, giving rise to 16 images, and the 16 images were analyzed and recurring patterns and biases were noted. The results for depression, the 4 images generated were these 4. For bipolar disorder, these images were generated. For schizophrenia, the 4 images generated are shown on the screen. And for obsessive compulsive disorder, the last prompt that we gave to the machine, the 4 images generated were as such. All the results showed childlike cartoonish images which were trivialization of the mental health disorders. The generative AI models favored cultural stereotypies over clinical data with the generation of childish cartoon-like images, and these also show the inherent bias of the system. The bias reflect the bias in the training data. Basically, algorithmic bias mirrors the data it is trained on, and this can be from the data it is turned on, which in turn is from the text caption pairings. This can reflect the social bias, the media bias, and even the historical notions. So the cartoonish depictions are often the historical notions of being those mentally ill, behaving childlike, and the media bias and the social bias which was present in the community of them being childlike. And in depression, if you had observed, the images were mostly of someone who is having a downward gaze. So that is how it is portrayed in historical texts, and this can often lead to self-stigma, which can lead to further delay in help-seeking behavior. Hence, a collaborative effort between the policymaker, the clinician, and the developer is important to ensure a responsible use of what is already in the public domain. Future directions would include analysis and comparison across multiple generative systems, as our study was now limited to just the DAL-E model. Larger image dataset and structured qualitative analysis of the images being generated are pertinent. And a longitudinal model monitoring, because these models tend to change over time longitudinally, it is very pertinent hence. The references are as shown. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Very nice presentation. Very unique topic. So, anyone from the audience wants to ask any question? Yes, please introduce yourself and you can ask the question. Madam, you can use the mic.
What is the clinical implication of this study?
The clinicians these days are going to encounter more and more patients who have actually seen these visual images before they come to an actual clinician, because there are barriers to care, especially in the field of mental health, where it's almost stigmatized by the society still. With that pertinent and with this information in mind, there's definitely going to be a delay in help seeking. And when the clinician is being encountered also, they're going to come with such notions of mental illnesses. So it's very pertinent that the clinicians are exposed to this at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. So we want to ask you why you chose, you and your professor, why you chose like this topic.
Because AI is like the need of the hour, the talk of the town. So
Fashion.
not actually fashion, ma'am, but then it's
Fashion.
what passion. Yes, for me.
Fashion.
Fashion. It is fashionable to talk about AI. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, right. So yes, so because it is very hip and fashionable.
Yes,
to,
ma'am.
You know, look at new topics, novel topics. So a lot of everyone has started looking at AI out of passion primarily, and because it's trendy. Fashion needs now all papers, articles, conferences, everywhere. Technology is trending. So
Yes.
trending kind of research topics, equivalent of fashion, but the right word to choose would be trending topic. So it's good that you've chosen a trending topic also, which is very relevant and very sensitive, and is integrating technology and psychiatry and machine learning. So I want to ask you, like, if a psychiatrist from a smaller institution versus at CIP, what do you think are the strengths of your institution or your research that can allow you to take up such topics for research? And what do you think are the limitations at other institutions where you think is a gap?
For us, basically, I wouldn't say this topic is a strength because we encounter patients mostly from the rural background and patients in such a state that
Technological expertise.
the infrastructure in CIP is far better compared to other smaller institutions across the country.
So that's a strength and
Yes,
an
ma'am.
added advantage.
Yes, ma'am.
And what can be a limitation?
The patient population that we are exposed to, they are not exposed to the same kind of material that we did the research on. So our exposure, the whole research was just limited to the machines and not with actual patients. We didn't
Okay.
consider patient perception.
Very
here.
nice. So one of the good things is that institutes have good infrastructure and support to conduct neuroimaging and technological and such research, and smaller institutions may face limitations because they might have to collaborate with other institutions to do research in such tech integrated areas. Can you tell me, like, what is a difficulty for a psychiatrist to conduct research in technology or like in AI and in machine learning? What limitation you face as a psychiatrist?
These are very novel topics which are not under the area of the psychiatrist per se. Like, we are not very conversant or very comfortable dealing with topics like machine learning because that actually has that's a different domain as such with deeper terms which we don't know the meanings and implications of. So we'll have to have a course on that probably to get an edge over other people who are conducting research on it. We need to be familiar with such terms to actually conduct a research on such topics.
Okay, thank you very nice. Dipali, you want to ask her? Okay, any more questions from the audience? Yes, you want to ask a question? No. Okay, so thank you very much. It's a very nice presentation, very novel topic. You have presented very well, and hope that more other institutes who don't have the facilities, they can collaborate with your institute professors and they can do some collaboration research on AI. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is the last this presenter, or is there any? Yes, so we have Shreya Pooja Duri. She's PhD researcher of clinical psychology, and she is presenting on holding, moving, and negotiating, understanding therapeutic space in dance movement therapy. So over to you, Shreya. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Hi, very good morning to everybody present here. So I'll start off with the introduction. So therapeutic space, it forms a cornerstone of psychotherapeutic practice. It is essentially the ground where therapy actually takes place. So it is a foundational component of the therapeutic encounter between a client and therapist. Werbart in 2023 stated in a research paper that a therapeutic space, it's not just a room, it's not just a geographic location, but it is a relational field. It is a psychological space where there is a social process and meaning making takes place. Kreshak in 2020 stated a body of research which says that therapeutic space, it influences client's level of self-disclosure, the therapeutic alliance between a client and a therapist, and the perceived quality of care. And I studied therapeutic space, especially in the context of dance movement therapy, because the spatial demands in DMT are qualitatively different. DMT is a kind of therapy in which there is use of movement and there's use of the body, and mostly it takes place in a group format. So in the practice of DMT, the body actively constructs, transforms, and negotiates the space through movement. So there is a need to understand how creating and sustaining therapeutic space in DMT is uniquely dynamic, relational, and embodied. So the research aim is, the study examines how DMT practitioners have conceptualized, constructed, and negotiated therapeutic space within the sessions. The research paradigm, it is a qualitative paper, so the research paradigm I have followed is the interpretivist and constructionist paradigm, which says then reality, there are multiple realities, and reality is subjective in nature, and the fact that reality is constructed or interpreted through the lived experiences of the participants. So the qualitative exploratory design I have used, it examines lived experiences of the therapists. It prioritizes the depth, nuance, and context-specific understanding as opposed to generalizability across the masses. So it also highlights the interpretive and reflexive process, and it recognizes the researcher's role in meaning making within the interpretivist paradigm. So positionality statement. My positionality as a researcher in this whole study is shaped by my training as a clinical psychologist, as a classical ODC dancer, and my ongoing training as a dance movement therapy facilitator. So I am informing you of my positionality because it influences not only the kind of questions I have asked my participants, but it also influences the meanings I perceive and draw from the data I have received. Sample and sampling strategy. I have interviewed 7 dance movement therapy professionals practicing in India, 6 females, 1 male, and the kind of sampling was a snowball sampling. Data collection method was an in-depth semi-structured interview which was conducted through Zoom virtually. Interviews ranged from about 60 to 100 minutes. They were audio recorded with consent and stored securely. Data analysis. The data analysis performed was thematic analysis by Braun and Clark. So the analysis, it gave me 3 major themes, which are therapeutic space as an embodied relational field, therapeutic space as an active catalyst for healing, and crafting the therapeutic space. The first one, therapeutic space, essentially deals with defining a therapeutic space from the perspective of dance movement therapy practitioners. They have described it as something which is in the here and now. It includes how clients inhabit the space, the way a client is sitting, the way they are facing the door, the way they are facing the therapist, or the way their body language exists in that present space. It also highlights how therapists co-inhabit the therapeutic space, how the therapist's body language is, how they are positioned within the room, therapy room. They are also, which again leads us to the point that the therapeutic space essentially is an immersive process and is it's co-created by both the therapist and the client. The second theme, which is therapeutic space as an active catalyst for healing. The first theme, we attempted to define what therapeutic space meant. In the second one, we tried to see the functional role of a therapeutic space. So here I have highlighted therapeutic space as an active catalyst and ingredient for healing. So it's under this I have found out how the therapeutic space acts as a space where clients recount the feeling of being seen, being held. It also includes exploring the moment. Clients through, in DMT sessions, they are given various props, and through various prompts by the therapist, use of shawls, different types of props, they are used to help them explore the present moment, their present state of feeling, their present state, emotional state. It also, the therapeutic space, it helps them discover new insights about themselves. And lastly, it helps in accessing deeper bodily narratives. In talk therapy, what happens? We use a lot of cognition while talking, and which means in the process of talking, we're also filtering out a lot of information. So there is a book which, there's a quote which says, "The body never lies." So in therapy, essentially in dance movement therapy, it says how we are not only accessing the narratives of our cognition, we are also accessing narratives trapped in our body, feelings which are stored deep in our body. Then we reach the final theme, which is crafting the therapeutic space. It includes sub-themes: attending to the physical environment, which means getting the music ready, getting the space ready, getting the props ready. The second part is the therapist's embodied presence, which is the countenance, the body language the therapist carries, the intentional cultivation of an authentic presence of the therapist. And finally, the last sub-theme is co-creating limits, boundaries, and therapeutic agreements. This talks about how the therapeutic space is co-created, how there is a on and off sharing of power between the therapist and the client. So with this, I'd like to conclude saying the therapeutic space in DMT is simultaneously embodied. It is to do with the body. It is a social process. It is relational between the therapist and client, between the therapist and the other clients as well. And it is co-created. It operates both as context and catalyst. The practitioners, they perceive space not just as a room or layout, but as a living relational field formed through movement, attunement, and shared bodily presence. So the strength of the study is its contextual relevance. I have interviewed all the practitioners I have interviewed. They are based in India, and it leads to unique cultural insights from the Indian perspective of DMT practice. Another is the rich qualitative data. I have done in-depth qualitative interviews, which has led to a lot of rich data. Limitations of the study, it has a gendered perspective. I have interviewed 7 people, 6 females and 1 male, which means also there is underrepresentation from the male perspective and underrepresentation from the other genders as well. So I have termed the gendered perspective as a limitation. It is a therapist-only perspective. I have only interviewed therapists. When I say therapeutic space has to be co-created, it means it's a two-way process. So in this particular study, the limitation is I have only interviewed the therapist's point of view. Third one, self-reported data. We are highly dependent on the therapist's retrospective statements about their therapy practice. I have not watched the therapists conduct the sessions, so I have put it as a limitation that we are depending on the therapist's version of events. Virtual interview format, we are talking about an embodied space where your body exists. I think in that sense, the fact that I did the interviews online, I think that is a major limitation. Implications. Implications are, I think, attending to clients' evolving relationship with the therapeutic space, and using space as a therapeutic tool across modalities, not only in movement work. I think the idea of therapeutic space itself is very underrated. So implications are to use the therapeutic space also as a tool of healing. Future directions, client's perspective. Since we are highlighting the fact that it's a co-created space, I think future researchers could do well to include client's perspective on how they perceive the therapeutic space, and probably comparative studies between verbal therapies, which use primarily verbal mode of communication, and a comparison between that and movement-based therapies or embodied therapies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very nice.
I can hear, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Very nice and novel concept, and you have given a very excellent presentation, elaborating your, strengths, limitations, implications, future directions. So it's a very nice, very well conducted research. So can you share with us about any age group perspectives, or there's some neurodevelopmental disorders and dance therapy done for children with differently abled children, or you're talking about only from your perspective, or it has some implications to psychiatric disorders also and to patients with illness, or you are just looking at mental health problems, or you are looking at any specific psychotherapeutic problem that you want to explore through dance?
So my study, it basically, it's like an umbrella thing which looks into the mental the process of therapy. So DMT in general, it has applications for a variety of disorders and variety of age groups. Like it can be used for children with ADHD, children with autism. It can also be used for geriatric population as well, who are having movement difficulties or who are having cognitive difficulties as well, apart from the usual adult population as well. So application wise, DMT has application across the neurodevelopmental spectrum. But what I am looking at here is simply the process of the therapy, the therapeutic relationship and the therapeutic space. So, yeah.
So, what kind of patients you think would like to, for research or for clinical practice, what kind of patients you think would like to explore this from a therapeutic concept, and what kind of patients you feel from your preliminary research analysis that this set of patients will not be either interested or comfortable, or even you are developing a good protocol. So what you think are some of the factors that can make somebody be willing, on some people who might not be comfortable?
So simply, I'll just look at the evidence. The kind of people I have interviewed, they have worked across a spectrum of places like juvenile homes, with women who have been rescued from trafficking circles, or even with children with developmental disorders. So I think the applicability is across a wide spectrum. But again, as you asked, indication would be, I think DMT is especially relevant for people who have an affinity for movement and dance. Of course, other people as well, but I think there is a certain kind of clientele who have a tendency to reach out for DMT sessions as well. So I think in terms of that, I think the client's preference of modality of therapy, I think that's what is of primary concern according to me. So,
Any specific school of therapy of dance, or it is generic, or it is any specific, or anything you have curated specially for your study, or like what is dance movement per se? Like any school it is following?
The therapists I have interviewed, they come from across, they have received their training. One person was trained in the UK, one person was trained from, there is a Sampurnata model based in Kolkata. They are trained across different models. There's a wide range of, there's one course being done in Mumbai, TIS Mumbai as well. So the trainings are quite vast in terms of degrees as well. Some have done masters, some have done diploma, some have done certification courses. Right.
Very nice, ma'am. May I give one comment? When you look at research, and when you look at an intervention-based research, and when you look at the integration of arts, especially dance, movement therapy, in research, who is doing the research is not important, but what is the research, that is most important. So you may have like well-trained people from, and there shouldn't be an heterogeneity. Heterogeneity will dilute your PhD researcher, right? So if you are thinking in terms of intervention, and if you're thinking in terms of replicability, or building up to an evidence or proof of concept of your own model, like a neural concept, proof study. So out of that, it is good to have eminent experts, but it's very good to, whenever you publish it or present it, to have that this is the intervention. So you have PICO principles. So when you look at pharmacological studies or non-pharmacological studies, there are some guidelines by consort, or which you look at principles and the intervention. So you have to maybe elaborate that this is an intervention and this 10 to 20 sessions have been done by experts, not their names, by qualified experts, but whichever is the specific school that is being doing, or 8 sessions of dance movement therapy from Western or Bollywood or Indian classical or just something. And these set of sessions were given over this many, hours, and something more about the intervention as a tool, or as a either it's a diagnostic or therapeutic. You may have to in future maybe define your interventions, and maybe let the audience or your readers know what's the process of how the intervention was developed, and then it adds up more to understand the effectiveness of the intervention. This is from our medical and psychiatric side, because you're also use no explorative models, or you use sometimes non-quantifiable research as well. So either way it's fine. But if you think in terms of recommending your intervention for psychiatrists to use it on their papers, then you can elaborate it further or develop it as an interventional model also. So thank you very much. It's a whenever there is a discussion, that means it's really good. Okay. And it is reaching a level of enhanced discussion, so that new ideas, and you can also take things up further. Lead to Deepali to add something.
Yeah, you very rightly, she has pointed out that where to apply, to whom it should be applied,
Right,
and which dance movements in particular we have to take care of. So otherwise it's a very good study and it has to be implemented. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Questions from the audience for her interesting paper? Anyone would like to ask anything on dance and movement therapy? Okay, so thank you very much. Very nice presentation. And with this, we shall conclude our free paper sessions for the morning. Dr. Deepali Gul joined a little later. So myself, Dr. Darpan, and Dr. Deepali, you want to give a chairperson concluding comments? Any? Okay, so we conclude this session, and thank you to the audience for attending this morning session, and thank you to all the participants who came and read their free papers, and thank you Dr. Nihal for inviting us to chair this session, and thank you to Dr. Astha and Dr. Vinay Kumar sir as the organizers of the WPA Psychiatrica for inviting me to chair this free paper session.
Thank you very much to the organizers for this beautiful session in the morning, and thank you everyone.
Now we felicitate the chairpersons.